So Terence Crawford versus Edigius Kavakaskas, aka Mean Machine, flew under the public eye's radar this past weekend, and you may think to blame it on the fact that it was a mandatory title defense nobody asked for, but Top Rank, taking a page out of DAZN's business model, and scheduling their event on the same night as the UFC's biggest card might have something to do with that. So let's take a quick look at the fight in case you missed it. So first and foremost, probably the biggest takeaway we can learn from this fight is the importance of lead foot dominance in the southpaw versus orthodox matchup. And this is essentially stepping your lead foot on the outside of your opposite stance opponent's lead foot to create the dominant outside angle. One of the reasons this is considered a dominant angle is largely due to the fact that your opponent's lead hand is no longer directly in the way of your lead hand. Take a look at this shitty drawing I made in MS Paint. You all may know that the lead hands are directly in line with one another in opposite stance matchups. Now, if one fighter were to step to the outside of their opponent's lead foot, as you see here, you notice the lead hands are no longer directly in line with one another. You also see that the rear hand is now in line with the opponent's head, and the opponent's rear hand is much too far to be able to be used effectively. So that's why this is largely considered a dominant position. Now, something you need to be mindful of is that if the goal is to get around the lead hand of your opponent, the same thing can be done if you step to the inside of your opposite stance opponent's lead foot to establish an inside angle. It's a much more risky position because you line yourself up with your opponent's rear hand, but as you can see, your lead hand now has a clear path down the middle. Now, before I bore everyone to death with drawings, the point I'm getting at with this is the story of the first few rounds of the fight. This happened a lot. Notice how whenever each fighter proactively established an angle, they were the one at the advantage because the opponent was forced to react to this. And this is how each guy was able to land their shots, whether it was from the outside angle or the inside angle. Now, it's important to note that up until now, whenever Mean Machine established the outside angle, he favored going down to the body. As you see here, he steps outside of Crawford's lead foot, establishing the outside angle and shoots the jab to the body. And this is in the third round, and right before his best moment of the fight. Now, like I said earlier, the one who initiates the angle is at the advantage because they are the ones proactively establishing the position, forcing their opponent to reactively adjust to it. In other words, they're beating their opponent to the step. Look here how Mean Machine initiates the dominant outside angle. Now, up until now, he would go with the jab to the body, but now he's going to change it up. Remember when I said the rear hand becomes lined up down the middle of your opponent when the outside angle is established? Well, we see Crawford lower his lead arm to block the jab to the body, but now all he has to defend himself from Mean Machine's right hand is the rear hand, and Mean Machine can either shoot the straight right hand or loop the right hand, making this a very unfavorable spot for Crawford. So Mean Machine loops the right hand around the glove, and Crawford uncharacteristically drops his hand to block a jab to the body that he was conditioned to expect. This right hand absolutely rocks Crawford and sends him to the canvas. It wasn't counted as a knockdown, but oh well. So we start to see both guys counter each other's step with a check hook. Here we see Crawford try to counter Mean Machine's inside angle with the check hook, and here we see Mean Machine counter Crawford's outside angle with the check hook. And again, here we see Crawford counter Mean Machine's inside angle with the check hook. But I want you to pay attention to this specific example. This is something you could incorporate into your own boxing if you find an opposite stance opponent establishing the inside angle on you a lot. Notice here how Mean Machine steps to the inside of Crawford's lead foot, establishing the inside angle. Crawford's center line is now open for a jab from Mean Machine because of the angle. So what is he going to do? So we see Crawford takes a very small step with his rear foot to adjust the angle to a much more defensive position. This slight change in the angle protects his center line because he is no longer squared up for the jab. And there we see Crawford counter over the top with the hook. This technique is something that might have been missed by most people watching the fight live, but I implore you to practice this if you want to improve at fighting opposite stance fighters. When fighting same stance opponents, the same concept of adjusting the angle with your rear foot still applies, and we need to look no further than this example from Floyd Mayweather. Here we see Juan Manuel Marquez step to the inside of Floyd Mayweather. It doesn't matter that they're both orthodox stance fighters. You can see Marquez has the inside angle and has Mayweather squared up. It's no different from Mean Machine stepping to the inside angle on Crawford. So how is Mayweather going to adjust? Just like what Crawford did, Mayweather takes a slight step with his rear foot to fix the angle and protect the center line. And this allows him to counter with the straight right hand. So whether you're fighting an opposite stance fighter or the same stance fighter, you can use this technique to counter angles from being set up on you. Once Mean Machine started slowing down, Crawford had a lot of success with the 2-3 combination. Against an opposite stance opponent, this combination is deceptively hard to avoid due to the hook coming from the blind angle and the forward momentum of the fighter using it. Notice how Crawford first steps to the outside angle to line up his straight left hand down the center line. And then with it lined up, he shoots the left hand and follows up with the right hook as his forward momentum carries him forward. This right hook is very hard to avoid because of all that forward momentum, and it makes him come from the blind angle around the lead hand, which is usually held low to a safe degree by fighters. And so towards the middle rounds, Mean Machine really started slowing down. He couldn't keep up boxing with Crawford at Crawford's insane pace, and like a shark smelling blood in the water, Crawford noticed this and pressed Mean Machine right away. The pressure started getting to Mean Machine. You see here he throws an ill-advised naked right hand out of desperation and gets countered for it. He was getting hit with more shots, which broke him down more and more, and it started snowballing until the fight was stopped. And thus Crawford wins by TKO once again. And hey, I finally got a prediction right. But this begs the question, who does Terence Crawford fight next? Top Rank's stable of welterweight contenders is running extremely thin, and I can't even think of anyone that makes sense off the top of my head. Top Rank constantly needs to either sign contenders or rush guys into title fights with Crawford before they're ready, just to feed him fights. We could see Crawford on the sidelines for a while if there's nobody ready in line for him. On a side note, based on this performance, do I still think Terence Crawford beats Errol Spence? To that I answer, yes, I do still think he beats Errol Spence. Yes, he took a lot of shots in this fight and he's been hit hard in a lot of his fights, but he always takes over and dominates the rest of the fight. What really impressed me in this fight was his crazy fast pace that he was able to sustain throughout the whole fight. Mean Machine, like every other Crawford opponent, couldn't keep up and crumbled under the pressure. And for those of you who watched the UFC this weekend instead, Crawford kind of reminds me of Max Holloway in that he takes big shots like it's nothing and weaponizes his pace, making his opponents crumble from sheer volume and of course technical skill. And this is why I think he beats Errol Spence. Spence probably dominates the first couple of rounds, probably stuns Crawford with a big shot, then Crawford wakes up, turns up the pace, and wins the majority of the rounds to win a decision. Now that's how I feel it goes down now, but the longer this fight takes to make, and the more years pass by, I think it favors Spence. Like I said, Crawford gets hit almost unnecessarily in a lot of his fights. He has a granite chin, but taking those shots one by one diminishes that chin. I'm reminded of Tim Bradley at the end of his career. He always had one of the greatest chins. It was impossible to hurt him. Then he took unnecessary damage against Ruslan Provodnikov and was never the same. He was out on his feet against Vargas, got dropped twice by Pacquiao in the third fight. Anyways, yes, I still think Crawford beats Spence, but the more time that passes by, the more I think it favors Spence. And wait, I'm not done talking yet. This almost wraps up the winter boxing fights I want to cover. That's all that's left, and the only fight that I was looking forward to is Harrison versus Charlo 2. And there's a drought of fights after that, so I'll have nothing to cover. If you have any requests, drop them down in the comments below, and the ones that spark my interest the most will be done. Anyways, thank you all for watching this far. Subscribe to the channel for more. Happy holidays to all, and I'll see you all in the next one.
Way longer than 9 months, but fuck it, it's all in due time. I turn the blood to a road with dreams of being a beagle. Don't want to, I need to. You gotta learn to keep it so equal. When you come up in a place where everyone got a piece but ain't peaceful, this is just part 1. Wait till the sequel.